Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Bird Undead or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by the avid reader _ sometimes writer, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Angela.
Bird Undead, Chapter 4, Oasis. By the positioning of the sun, she guesses it might be around 10 a.m. when they start, and winces slightly at how late that is compared to the 7 or 8 a.m. starts they've been doing the previous days. It had been a necessary delay, without a doubt, but that's still less time they'll have to cover the however many clicks they still need to get through. The trees continue to thin further and further around them until they reach the end, and it's maybe 1 p.m. when they do, if the taller girl had to guess. The edge of the forest is separated from the arid dust of what looks like a desert by a running river. It doesn't look that deep, the water probably coming up no higher than their mid-thighs, and the current is slow and peaceful, but they're going to have to wade their way across it to get to the next part of their trek. Have I ever said how much I fucking hate hiking? I didn't before this, but now I think I'd like to never do it again when we get back. Rael pants. The energy the walking takes still seems to be a lot on her body. Collar, look. Tell me you see that too, Abigail replies, trying to keep her voice calm and pointing toward the river with her free hand. The blonde's eyes trace up her arm and across her hand to the extended finger until she can find what the taller girl is pointing at. If you mean that river, then yes. So either we're both hallucinating the same thing, or that's fucking water, the fixer agrees, relief and excitement coming out at the end of the answer. They're dragging each other, stumbling and tripping, but they get to the edge of the river and kneel in the moss and sand of the bank. Both girls scoop up dripping sips of the cool water with cupped hands and drink their fill, their bodies demanding they take as much of it as they can. Abigail distantly remembers that they should probably boil the water to be sure it's safe, but there's nothing to put it in, or she'd have started the fire necessary to do so already. Water is another thing on the list of ways to die that she'll be pissed about, and she lounges back on the riverbank when she hits her limit. Any more water and she'll feel nauseous, so she takes off her boots and socks, dipping her sore feet in the water downstream from where her companion seems to have just finished drinking her fill of water too. It's a good idea you got there, Rael nods, dropping to sit next to her and doing the same. Their knees and ankles occasionally brush together while they sit and rest for as long as Abigail can tolerate. She pulls herself back up to her feet and uses the hooked dagger to cut a thick strip off the bottom of her shirt, the remaining fabric just barely covering the top hem of her pants. She can feel the blonde's confused gaze on her as she crouches to dip the strip into water. She wrings it out and does it again, continuing the process until water dripping from the dark fabric finally drips as clear as the river it came from. Abigail dunks it one last time and wrings it out until it's damp. She folds it over itself until it's a layered rectangle, long enough to cover from the tip of her middle finger to her wrist just below her palm. What are you up to, Bellwether? The fixer wonders, her confusion growing when the taller girl drops back down to sit beside her. Here, I figured you might want to get some of the blood off while you still have the opportunity, the blaster answers, holding out the strip for her to take. Thanks, Rael nods, taking the offered fabric and gingerly scrubbing it at the dry blood that's still caked in swatches across her stomach and lower back. Abigail silently asks for it back with an extended hand, rinsing and wringing it out again and handing it back. She always seems to know exactly what it needs to be done, despite continuing to look out over the sand they're going to need to deal with next. We're almost there. I can see buildings across the dust. We might be able to make it before dark if we hurry. Let's go, the taller girl relays, getting back to her feet. The blonde is quick to do the same, copying her companion when Abigail balls her socks together and tucks them into one boot and the dagger in the other. The blaster ties the laces together in a loose but sturdy-looking knot and unbuckles the belt, removing the sword from her back. I don't want wet boots or socks when we still have walking to do. It's just going to make my feet hurt more, she finally explains, smiling slightly when she looks up to see that the fixer must have copied her, with the addition of her jacket that's folded neatly with the boots on top of it. That makes sense to me. I would have just walked through and paid for it later. The story of my life, really. Rael muses, and Abigail snorts with laughter, the sound making her companion half smile. That's because you're a shitbird, the taller girl finally responds while she wraps the tight laces of her boots around the back of her neck. The boots themselves sitting against her chest. The belt goes around the back of her neck next, and the blaster starts to wade into the water with the sword held up by her head. The water ends up being deeper than it looks, coming up to her belly button and stopping an inch or so below the stab wound on the fixer, who was carrying the folded strike jacket and her boots above her head. They get across without incident, and it's a moderately steep climb to get out on the side they've reached. It takes a few minutes, but Abigail scrambles up first, setting down the sword and freeing her neck before leaning back over to take Rael's cargo from her. She grabs the loose belt from where she's left it by her boots, and uses it to help her companion ascend the bank too. The blonde's foot slips just as she's about to get to the top, and it's only a quick grip on her forearm from the taller girl that keeps her from falling back into the river below. The blaster tries to be careful as she tucks the fixer to safety, but there's still a sharp gasp of pain, and Rael folds over forward on herself at the hip as soon as her feet are on solid ground again. Her hands fly up to cover the wound in her chest and apply pressure, her breathing coming out as a ragged pant through the sharp agony. Fuck. I think something tore. The blonde gets out in a wheeze through gritted teeth. Shit, I tried to be careful. Shitbird, are you bleeding? Let me see. Here, sit down, Abigail fusses, gently guiding the smaller girl down into a sitting position and crouching in front of her. She can see the blood that's steadily starting to come through the hand Rael has over it and curses under her breath. Here, use this to help without bleeding and give me your hand, she orders, hurrying to fish the folded strip of her shirt out of one of the knee-height cargo pants on the side of her strike pants and hand it to the fixer. Abigail, you can't try to fix me again. I don't care that we might have just staved off the dehydration. We still haven't eaten, and if you pass out, I'm shoving you over the edge of that bank and into the river to wake you up, Rael warns, narrowing her eyes. I won't. I'm not going to. I just want to see how bad it is, the taller girl reassures, holding her hands up in surrender. The blonde offers out her free hand and the blaster takes it, focusing on opening a link as quickly as she can. The shadow of the stab she carries on her own chest echoes the sharp burning and throbbing that comes through it before anything else. It makes her hiss and inhale sharply through her nose, while her free hand comes up to put pressure over the shallower version of the fixer's irritated stab wound. This is going to hurt for a few seconds, caller. I'm sorry, Abigail warns, waiting for the tight knot from the companion before prodding and investigating the extent of the new damage. Damage she'd caused by accident. Half of the tissue she'd managed to mend on Rael's lung earlier has pulled apart again, but there's no hole through it, the last few layers holding firm. It's a small relief, one that's rapidly overshadowed when she starts to reel the connection back again. The real cause of the fresh agony is the tear in the skin halfway out the wound. Some of the surface skin and a small part of the muscle just beneath it had ripped when the taller girl had pulled her up to keep her from taking an unexpected dunk in the river. It's made the gash marginally longer and wider, and the nerves affected burn like hot coal had been shoved inside the stab. Abigail pulls back entirely, releasing the blonde's hand to break the link and not trying to heal her again as promised. She runs the now free hand through her hair while she relays her findings to the smaller girl, who's still keeping pressure over the angry puncture with the strip of the blaster's shirt. Guess it's a good thing we're almost there, Rael mutters loud enough for the taller girl to catch. Caller? Ray, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you worse. How's the bleeding? Abigail wonders guiltily, internally cursing herself for unintentional roughness. Don't apologize, it was an accident. I think it's starting to stop, but the bandage is so soaked, so I'm not sure, really. The blonde tells her firmly, not allowing any room for an argument. Give it here, the taller girl requests, holding her hand out expectantly. She sees the fixer wince when she pulls the flooded fabric away from her injured skin, before putting it in the extended hand. The blaster rises back to her feet and jumps back down the water, rinsing the makeshift bandage until it runs clear, and then wringing it out until it's as dry as she can get it. She unfolds part of it and puts it around the back of her neck so she can get back up the incline of the bank. Here. Abigail refolds the fabric and hands it back after clapping the dust off her hands. You didn't have to do that. The bleeding is slow now. We need to get going again. I just need a way to keep this in place while we walk. I think it should do until we get there. Rael huffs, but her eyes show that she's grateful for what the blaster has done. We can use my belt. You'll just have to carry the sword. It's not heavy, I promise, the taller girl decides, retrieving the belt in question. Why not mine? The blonde wonders, pointing out that she still has her own belt around her waist. Collar? I don't know if you know this, but you're small. That belt won't be long enough to tighten the way we'll need it to. Hold that bandage where you want it to stay and sit still, Abigail points out politely before giving her instruction. The fixer does as she told, and the taller girl sets the belt diagonally across her companion's torso, making sure the buckle is tight and securing it down by Rael's lower belly. Stand up and move around so we can see if I need to tighten that before we get going, the blaster suggests, pushing herself back upright and padding over to the boots. She pulls on her socks and unties her laces before pulling on her boots and refastening them. It's good, the blonde confirms, wincing while she leans over to do the same. As soon as she's standing again, Abigail comes over and carefully secures the sword to her back and makes sure it won't shift around while they're walking before resecuring the hook dagger to her hip. Why do you even want this again? What are you gonna do with it? We just don't use swords. The military doesn't either. You'd better not be keeping it as some kind of fucked up souvenir and try to hang it on our wall, the fixer wonders, taking a few more experimental steps while the blaster scoops up the jacket and unfolds it. She places it over the smaller girl's shoulders and puts the hood over the extended hilt of the blade until it forms a sort of a shade over most of her companion's exposed skin. There, that might help you against the sun since I don't see any cover. You're pale as hell, Shitbird, and the last thing we need is for you to get sun poisoning. And no, I don't want it for any messed up reasons, relax. What kind of woman can say no to such a shiny thing like that? Abigail explains, fussing a little bit more over the jacket's placement as an improvised shade. That's not your actual reason for keeping it, is it? Rael wonders skeptically as they start to walk, linking their hands together again without thought. Of course not. When am I ever that vain, Collar? Witches don't use swords. We like to have our seeds and our scourges. But a scourge is just leather with limited uses in close quarters. And these Camarilla use blades and have shown that they can stop us from using work. I can throw a hell of a punch if I need to, but I'd rather not need to get that close to a guy or multiple guys with knives. So I'm keeping the sword and I'm going to learn how to use it in case I end up backed into a corner, like I was at the wedding. They caught me off guard once. I don't tend to make the same mistake a second time. The taller girl chuckles, shaking her head before she becomes more serious. That's not a bad idea. It'll definitely make you more flashy, Bells. The blonde muses thoughtfully, and their blaster hums in agreement while they continue forward.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.